Okay, welcome back. So in the last podcast, I had highlighted 14, 19, and 22 as problems I wanted to do with you. So we did 14, so let's try 19 and 22. Notice I have the word tricky beside 19. Take a look at the bounds. Remember, this one is supposed to go lower and then upper, at the top of the integral. But notice the bounds are switched. You've got your lower on top and so you know a rule that deals with that. So bear that in mind. Okay, so now that I gave you the hint, I rewrote the integral over here. I'm hoping that you're thinking that I should rewrite it as the integral from -1 to 1 of r plus 1 whole thing squared dr. But then, what do I have to do? Does anybody remember? Yes, put a negative out front of the integral. Okay, again, just using those laws of integrals that we talked about in the past. So it's okay for me to, go ahead and reverse these bounds, but I've got to negate the integral, or the integrand in this case. It's going to be the same. Okay? All right. So now we're ready to do this. We could do this in multiple different ways, but I'm going to start by expanding this polynomial. So we'll expand that to r squared plus 2r plus 1 dr. And we're still writing the integral symbol because we're reminding ourselves that we haven't actually done the integration. We've just kind of rewritten the original. And then on the next slide, I will rewrite that expansion. Okay, so here we are. Now we're ready to integrate. So the integral of r squared is r cubed over 3. The integral of 2r is 2r squared over 2, and I'll write that out temporarily. I know a lot of you guys are getting good at doing, the cancellation such as that in your head, okay? And the integral of 1 is just 1r, okay? And we're going to bound that from -1 to 1, and what I like to do sometimes is just, crunch this whole thing out. And then know in the end that I'm going to negate it in the very end. Okay? So now let's go ahead and plug the upper bound in. Everywhere you see an r, and you can do some mental math here, but 1 cubed is 1, so 1 divided by 3, okay, that's a third. And here you're going to have 1 squared, which is 1. And then 1 times 1 is still 1. So now you have all of that minus, and now I'll do this in another color so you can see it. Now we're going to take the lower bound, -1, store that in. That's the fundamental theorem of calculus that tells us to do that. Okay? So now we put the lower bound in. So -1 cubed is -1, and it's over 3. And then -1 squared is +1. And then 1 times -1 is -1. Okay, so we clean all of that up, and then eventually we negate it. So on this side of the game, you see 2 1/3. So I'll just write that here. So 2 1/3. We can go back between the slides. 2 1/3. And on this side of the game, well, 1 minus 1, that cancels, and then you have minus -1/3, which is +1/3. But then that whole thing you're going to negate. Remember that we've got that negative sign floating out there. So in the end, 2 1/3 plus 1/3 is 2 2/3. And of course that's negative. Final answer. Yay. Hope you made that with me. Okay. Now let's go back to another problem that we wanted to try together, which is number 22, and that'll be our last one for this podcast. I'll go ahead and rewrite that on another slide. So just because of the way I zoomed and used the snippet tool, it got a little blurry, but it is the integral from -3 to -1 of y to the 5th minus 2y over y cubed dy. So, oops, I put that right here. Okay, and again, we're just kind of using our algebra skills to do that. And when I say algebra skills, I hope you're thinking at this thinking, yeah, I'm just going to looking at this thinking, yeah, I'm just going to split the fractions like that, such as, y to the fifth over y cubed. You have a monomial in the denominator, so that's what allows you to do that. Minus 2y over y cubed dy. We integrate that from -3 to -1. And you want to clean that up a little bit, so then you've got y squared minus. Here the y's are bottom heavy, so you can cancel, but you're going to be left with y squared downstairs. And that's another way of saying, 2y to the -2. You can also say it like that. So that's going to be our integrand there when we clean that up. And we'll integrate that on the same bounds from -3 to -1. Okay, so remember, all of that was just a cleanup process. I haven't actually integrated yet. So I'm using that lovely little +1 rule, the rule that the integral of x to the n is x to the n plus 1 over n plus 1. So the integral of y squared, you now know, is y cubed over 3. We'll use that when you have an algebraic expression like that, you can do that, or an algebraic function, I should say. So let's add 1 to that, so then we'll have y to the -1 over -1, and that lovely coefficient of 2 there just stays. Okay, and now we have that bounded from -3 to -1. Notice when I write it this way, always lower, upper. Okay, we can clean that a little bit. We can call that y cubed over 3. I always clean it before I start plugging things in. Like negative over negative is a positive, so that's plus 2y to the -1. We can just I'm going to draw a box around it, bound that from -3 to -1. Okay, now in another color, I just illustrate that we're going to take that upper bound of -1, store that in everywhere we see a y, and think about that. So then that's going to take us to, I rewrote it here on the next slide so we could see it a little better. That's going to take us to -1 cubed is still -1 over 3 plus -1 raised to the -1 power is still negative, so you're going to have -2. All of that, and then minus. Now we're going to take the lower bound, store that in. Well, -3 cubed is -27, and that's over 3. And then plus 2 times -3 to the -1st power. So I know that's a lot of thinking and crunching. So we clean that up. On this side of the scope, you get, -1/3 plus -2 is -2 1/3. And over here, negative times a negative is definitely a positive. So we have, you can almost think of that as distributing the negative. So we have plus 27/3. And over here, -3 to the -1 really means 1 over -3. So that's a -1/3 and then times 2, which is -2/3. But like I said, you're negating -2/3, so it's in the end going to be positive 2/3. All right, and then when you arrive here, just a lot of crunching, just got to add it all together. Okay, so I had hit pause, but this quantity here is -7/3 plus 27/3. That's going to lead you to 20/3, and then plus another 2/3. That's a 22/3. Final answer. So I'll just say here, final answer on that is 22/3. All right. Hope that helps. I think that is all for this podcast. Let's see. Yep, we had tackled 19 and 22. Be on the lookout for more in your near future. Good luck.